he owns like the place. He struts around like, yeah, you know, he doesn't care. He doesn't run to anything. He's picky about his food. He's like, man, you gotta do this for me. He loves being catered to, all that kind of stuff. You know, DACA has his own, you know, right, DACA?
Yeah, he's so, you know, I'm sure, you know, we can all guess where his name came from, but can you tell us how that came about?
Of course. Yeah, no, ultimately, and it's actually really, in fact, appropriate because of, you know, kind of this being it. You know, he's my survival symbol, you know. You know, it just goes to show you know, how many times, you know, has this thing been knocked back and forth, and yet, you know, he still lives on. I still have not had to change his name. I still have not changed his so on.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, it's always interesting when I go to the dog park and they say, what is your dog's name? And I say DACA, and they say, oh, how'd you spell that? And I'm like, you spell it deferred action for childhood arrivals.
Such an immigration attorney response.
And
right?
they go, yeah, that's a response. You know, that's how you spell it, you know? And interesting, you know, it's always interesting how that always leads to a conversation.
Okay, ladies, so I think we're live right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning, ladies. Yes,
Good
we love the
morning.
conversation.
Good to see everyone.
Guest of honor.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Yes.
Hi, DACA.
Hey, DACA. Come on, man.
Well,
Please, pretend you're interested.
It sounded like you responded, right? Did I see a movement?
Yeah, ever so slightly, man. Yeah. We're like...
DACA's got to be there because he's been on this ride with us forever.
Right,
and we're really, we always say that he is our good luck to bring us the good results in DACA. So here we go. So good morning again, ladies.
Good morning.
And hello, everyone, for joining us today. We have a special guest with us today. We have attorney Media Agansari Nasrabadi. She's a senior attorney with Yemi Getacho's Immigration Law Office. Thank you for joining us, Media.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And we, of course, have back again attorney Yemi Getacho and attorney Yema Maesho. And I myself, I'm attorney Mulo Alamayo. And we're very delighted that you joined us today as we have some interesting discussions that we will be bringing to you. This whole last week has really been a roller coaster of a week for us in U.S. immigration. And we are here today to be able to share the good and the very concerning events that have taken place in immigration rules or laws that have been going on. But before we get into that, I would like to say that today is June 20th, of course, 2020, as we all know, and it's World Refugee Day. Mm-hmm. And this is a day where the world gets a chance to be able to acknowledge and be aware of the suffering and plight of refugees all over the world. It is also a time when human rights advocates are able to get the chance to be able to share their struggles and their achievements and what work is being done in terms of being able to bring about human rights protection all over the world. So today is a day that we're all going to make a call to everybody to take a moment out of your day today, whether it be, what's an hour or two out of your day, to be able to pause and to make yourself aware of the plight of immigrants and the plight of refugees and the suffering that they're going through around the world and what is happening to them as well in each of your own countries, in your own backyard. Make yourself aware of what is going on, to be able to voice your opinion to your representatives, to be able to voice your concern about the difficulties that refugees and asylum seekers are facing all over the world, and to be able to join this movement or this struggle to be able to bring human rights to everybody around the world. And if we do that in each of our own backyards and in each of our countries, I strongly believe that we will be able to make great progress in bringing about human rights all over the world. So making that call to you, I'm going to, as usual, turn this over to our wonderful Yemi Getachew, who will moderate and lead us in our discussion today. And maybe Yemi, if you can start with telling us a little bit of what's really been going on in the last week when I say a roller coaster, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Wow, that was, that's powerful, wow. We should take a pause just to segue into what is going on. I am reminded that on the Statue of Liberty is written this great promise for all the world to see as representative of what America is and hopes to be, which is, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Send these, the homeless, tempest toast to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Those are words of promise. And on World Refugee Day, as you said, when we acknowledge those that have been forced to leave their homes, their lives, everything they had, everything they own, and everything they know in search of a better thing, we have to acknowledge that as something that is big and huge and beyond us. But coming to this week, immigration practitioners, Mulie, Yema. So for the last 3 years, has there ever been an uneventful week in the world of immigration? You know, has there ever been? You know, I was looking back at some notes that I used to do when I chaired the Santa Clara Valley ALA, and I used to do these Friday chair notes. And this is in 2018, and every single week I was reading, so I sort of summarized what happened in the week. And every week was eventful, heart-wrenching, you know, heart-stopping. And this week is no different. I think, you know, the DACA, the Supreme Court DACA decision was huge and frankly, unexpected, delightedly so. But it was huge, right? And somebody especially was celebrating this guy. You know, does he look
Mr.
like he's
DACA
celebrating?
Himself, huh?
He's Mr. DACA himself. And I adopted DACA, I think maybe about 3.5, 4 years ago, on one of those DACA repeal times. And you know, I've been practicing immigration law for 25 years, and I usually do a lot of asylum work and have heard the most heart-wrenching stories. But there's something about DACA that hit inside of me in a big way. There's something about it. And whenever, you know, DACA's, you know, program was ending, was about to be ended, and so on and so forth, I would have this incredible like pain, more so than at other times. And when I got DACA from the shelter, when I adopted him, I named him DACA as a hope that DACA would continue and survive in spite of. And that's kind of how it has seemed to be, right? Yeah. Because, you know, this week or every Monday, you know, immigration lawyers would be like anticipating, is the SCOTUS decision going to come out today? And is it going to end DACA? And it didn't. It lives on by a thread. So just to sort of give a little bit about DACA, I'm going to ask you, Yema, to talk to us a little bit about, you know, what was the decision and how did it come about? And if you could give us a little background about DACA, that'd be great.
Great, yeah. Well, gosh, how do I follow that opening? I don't have any profound opening statement. I mean, looking at what I can say is listening to you guys. I mean, I see the loss that our country, we're being from Ethiopia, and then, I think, Medea, I don't know where your
from Iran
background is from, but I see basically the brain drain, the loss for our countries, but not to celebrate this beautiful intellectual people who advocate the American ideals. It's a shame. I mean, just seeing that is just, to me, I'm moved, I'm touched, and I'm inspired. I wish I had, yesterday when we talked about like our meeting today, you guys didn't tell me to prepare a profound statement. What's going on? But I really appreciate it, and I'm inspired as usual.
You do.
Yeah, well, so in any rate, so here we are again. A couple of things, Yemi, you mentioned, I was thinking the same thing. There's something about DACA that really moved me, and that just felt like close to my heart. I usually call them like the DACA kids. I mean, most of them are like now in their late 30s, like the people who initially received DACA. But it's just, there's something, I think, seeing people, we all make choices in life. And some of us, like other people happen to make some choices for us, like, yes, they have to make these choices because. What happened?
Right. No, you're still on.
Sorry,
you're still on. Yeah, you are.
So,
we can
sorry,
hear you.
Sorry,
yeah.
I can't
you're
see
saying...
myself, so sorry about that. Okay, I'm still here. All right, sorry, I don't know what happened.
You're good.
Anyway, so so where was I? So yes, definitely, there's something about DACA that's really, to me, just kind of stood out. So to see what came out of the Supreme Court this week, it was exciting. I think we were all waiting. I was waiting, just, to, especially with the earlier, the decisions that came earlier in the week. I thought that was kind of like they're trying to soften the blow for us. So, to see it, coming the way it did, it's very exciting, and I'm glad we're here. So I'll briefly talk about DACA, just how did it come about, or like where it has been, and then what does it mean going forward. So DACA basically is, it's short for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And President Obama in 2012 signed an executive action that is basically designed as a stop-gap measure, which shields children who came here as, like when they were young. So what DACA is and what DACA isn't is, DACA basically, like the benefit of DACA is like people would have like the ability to work, to go to school, to have a driver's license. But what DACA isn't is, it's not a path to citizenship. That's something, hopefully in the future we'll get there. But right now, it's not what it is. So with DACA, basically the basic requirements of DACA are, if you came here to the United States before your 16th birthday, and you were at least 15 years old at the time you apply, and have been living in the US at the time you submit your application, and you've been living in the United States since
June 15, 2007. And you are here, right?
You were here, and then you're enrolled in a school or had earned a GED, then you can qualify for it. There's certain disqualifications.
And then there's that magical date of June 15, 2012.
Yes, you must have been here in the US on June 15, 2012. That, and then also, like, you're not supposed to, well, you to qualify for DACA, if you have a felony conviction, what they call significant misdemeanor, or if you have 3 or more misdemeanor convictions, then you don't qualify. So those are kind of the basic requirements.
Right. Mm-hmm. So basically, if I don't know, and in 2012, I remember, I was just thinking about this morning, when DACA first came out, all of us were wrestling with, should we or shouldn't we apply? Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that was like this benefit that came out and everybody was like, yay, and so on and so forth, because of exactly what you said, Yema. This is not a path to citizenship. this is not permanent residence. We actually were not guaranteeing them anything. Yeah. But in essence, what we were asking, or what was being asked for these young people, and this is like a very small segment, and there's a certain like cherry picking preferential and all of that. I mean, I have a lot of issues with that as well. But for this small, like privileged, or, and I'd use that in quotes, group, we were saying, we will, if you come out, trust us, the government, that we will not deport you. But instead, we will defer. We acknowledge that you need to be deported, but we will defer that deportation for this 2-year period. If you pay money for the application for a work permit, and if you meet all of these criteria, and then we'll see what happens at the end of 2 years. So there's no promise of an actual benefit, an actual path to citizenship, an actual like change of status. There was nothing that this was, all it was doing was just deferring the deportation. We were just saying, we'll forbear that. And I remember, I don't know, Mulia, do you remember just a lot of the anguish about, should we apply or should we not? Should we expose their address? Should we not do that? What, and it just occurred to me.
Yeah. And the thing is, Yemi, with DACA also, what really always saddens me is how many of these bright young men, boys, young bright people that were coming to my office and were saying, are you sure it's going to be okay? And a lot of them, honestly, for the first time is when they knew that they didn't have any paper, that they were not US.
Not American.
Definitely. Yeah. None of them even, most of them really didn't even know, but they had this excellent record. I mean, we're seeing kids that are on honor roll, 4.0 and above GPAs, really good citizens. And they were so scared, and each time saying to me, are you sure it's okay? Yeah. And the confidence that I had in my country and the way it was betrayed and how I felt, my confidence in my country also betrayed them when I saw DACA trying to be rescinded, is because of the promises I made to those applicants.
And it was going to be okay.
It's going to be okay. Yeah. The US is realizing what good citizens you are, which you are, and it's going to be okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sorry. Yeah, it's going to be okay. Nobody's going to do anything to you. If anything, it's going to get to hopefully a better permanent situation.
A path. We thought it was. We thought this was a program that was going to be started as a way to show how you would treat the overall. So you take like this small segment, but the idea and the thought is that if this works as a program, then this was going to be like a pathway for other programs to come about. So it was never intended. And so the reason this discussion wanted to have is that, people have a mistaken understanding of what this is, right? But even in DACA, in its DACA-ness, fails to recognize that these individuals are Americans in everything but documents, and not only that, but we pit a whole bunch of we try to pit the kids against the parents, like saying, oh, the parents are the ones that did the illegal act, the kids did nothing illegal, sort of like, so that you look upon your parents who sacrificed everything to bring you here as these criminals that kind of brought you here through quote unquote no fault of your own. We pit those that were able to finish school, but we're not. And we don't excuse some, it's got its own other things. But even then, as I said, it was this pure program. But coming back to this as a program, and I'm going to come back to you, Yema, is the Supreme Court basically did not really rule substantively on the legality of DACA or not, right? Basically, it felt to me like, okay, so I'm guilty of this all the time. This is how I've lived my life, right? I never completely studied for anything or did any of the work that was required, right? I would like skim here, skim there, and kind of put things together and so on. That's kind of what the SCOTUS told the administration, right? It's like, basically, it's like, show us the work, man. It's not that you can't rescind or you can't rescind, but it's like, show us the work. Why did you do that? So you need to follow this XYZ, and sort of gave them approval. So can you tell us, can you summarize what that decision was, Yema?
Yeah, basically, I think like there's a few points you guys touched on, like it's worth mentioning. I feel like the reason, one is just, I know it's going back, but the reason why DACA, as we know it, came to be, because, like since 2002, there was, like a legislative proposed legislation that's called Dream Act, because Congress couldn't get that to, for the lack of better word, they couldn't get their act together and they couldn't pass that. This is a patchwork. It's not everything. The way I used to explain it to my clients were, we want the whole cake, right? We want a path to citizenship, but we will take a piece of the cake at this point. And, that's how DACA came about. Like, I think people understood the importance of making sure these dreamers, they're dreamers, they're Americans in every sense except their paper. Most of them want to serve their country, America. They want to serve in the military. They want to participate in society, in every way they can. But the Congress wasn't moving, so President Obama took this action, and here we are. So basically, in 2017, the current administration decided to rescind DACA. So there was lots of activities going on, meaning, like lots of decisions on the lower court level. And in fact, a federal judge in California said, okay, like the administration cannot do this, and put injunction, but that injunction limited, it didn't maintain like the whole DACA, which is you can apply, like if you're a new applicant, you can submit new application. If you're a current DACA recipient, you can renew your DACA application. Or if you want to travel outside of the US, then you can apply for what's called advanced parole. So what that limited injunction did was it kept the renewal application moving forward while the case is being, like appealed and decided by superior courts, but limited the decision to just no longer new applications were allowed to be submitted, and then the AP, the advanced parole application, was also put on hold. So sometime last year, the Supreme Court, I think there was a Ninth Circuit Court also that affirmed the lower judge's decision. So the administration appealed the case to the US Supreme Court. Basically, the US Supreme Court heard the argument, and they said, well, your reasoning, basically what it comes down is your reasoning for rescinding DACA is not, it's not legal. It's not based on any legal, it's what they call it's arbitrary and capricious, right? So basically what that means is there's no considerable, reliable, factual connection to why you're doing what you're doing. So that's, the good part is, that's the decision. The downside on it is the administration can come back and say, okay, if they do their homework, right, they could take away DACA, but, the DACA
and the thing is that the president has signaled via Twitter, his favorite medium of communication, that he's going to do his enhanced application. He's going to, have his administration do their homework and do that. So we don't know where things stand, but basically, just to reiterate or to recap what you're saying, Yema, you're saying that the series of litigation that led up to the Supreme Court decision had to do with, the lower court striking down portions of the program, but keeping other parts of the program. And then, but the administration throughout asserting the right to rescind the DACA, and that it may not have had to comply with the APA requirement, the specific requirements, and do their homework. And basically what the Supreme Court was in a majority decision written by Robert, said, no, you have to comply with that. You cannot be arbitrary and capricious about the way you rescind a program that had given benefits. And so basically, that's what it lies. So now that we have that and we sort of understand that, and by the way, shout out to the attorneys that took the case up and litigated it. And you should know that, one of my heroes and a Facebook friend, so it's like an honor. He's a DACA recipient and he's now an attorney. So, can you imagine, this is a DACA recipient attorney who fights, and sometimes, or mostly, he even wins cases for his clients to grant them benefits that he himself does not have, because all he has is, as we said, is DACA and that protection. So, this is going a lot. So I want to bring, my super duper, better lawyer, I should say, associate, Medya, into this. And for those of you that do not know, Medya is a fantastic lawyer. She's not just smart and so on, but her heart and everything is perfectly aligned exactly where it should be. And she's like this most amazing advocate. And as much as I would like to say she's my associate and, I've mentored her and kind of molded her, I have learned a lot about pushing for things from her. And it is my honor that she is the head of Yemi Getachew Immigration Law Offices, while I sit back and kind of go, all right, I can dial this one in, So Medya, let me ask you, going forward, what are some of the things that you have seen in terms of what would you counsel, our DACA clients or people that want to apply for DACA now? How do we go forward from here?
First of all, thank you for that, Yemi. It's an honor truly to be among you guys. I mean, you guys are expert in the field. I'm like nothing compared to you guys. So it's truly an honor to be here with you guys. But in terms of what this decision means and where do we go from here now? The Supreme Court decision essentially could mean that people who were eligible to apply for DACA and were not able to meet the requirement right before it was rescinded, or didn't meet the deadline before it was rescinded, now they could apply for DACA. It could also mean that the individuals who already have DACA, they can renew it, they can continue to renew it, and they can apply for, as Yema mentioned, for travel documents to be able to travel outside, which could be beneficial for many people who could lead to help them to maybe eventually get the green card through that. So it could be extremely helpful for many. But we're still waiting for the directives and USCIS's word on it. I know before this decision come out, many DACA recipients were nervous and they didn't know what's going to happen to them. They didn't know what's going to be in the future for them. But luckily for this decision, there is a small window of opportunity left.
That's awesome. And as I said, we all remember our first DACA clients, right? Or our signature DACA client and their stories. And to me, it's very important that we are the stewards of these stories that we hear. And they're stories of extraordinary triumph in the middle of not so comfortable circumstances. And I know, for example, I don't know whether you do that or not, but right after, the first 2 years of DACA expired and we were doing the renewals, there's a sheet called the I-70 a 765 worksheet or something that you attach. And on that, I don't know who reads it. I don't know whatever, but I used to ask every single of my DACA clients when they came for renewal, how has getting DACA changed your life? How did it change your life? And whatever they would tell me, since there was that sheet of paper, I don't know who randomly would or would not read it. My officer, it's probably junked in their file somewhere, and when we FOIA it, we'll get it. But I would write down how their life was changed because of this little thing, this little work authorization that we gave them that was renewable, this little respite that we gave them, where they could breathe and with a little comfort. DACA is the most successful, by any stretch of any imagination. Right. It's the most successful program, when you see what it has done. I would hope that we would go beyond DACA. And I would hope that, we would get to a place of really recognizing, they are. And by the way, as I always say, just this narrowly carved out little entitled, group, I would hope that this gets expanded and that this would be the prototype to show what actually happens when you recognize and give even just like a slight benefit, how much immigrants contribute to the fabric of the society on a larger narrative. Right. And, that having said that, unfortunately, this sounds so nice, this sounds so hopeful. I wish we could end on this kind of like a positive note, but of course we are in 2020 in the United States of America under the kind of administration that has, certain, specific attacks on especially a program. And it's poignant today that it is World Refugee Day and that we are talking about it. And this is my segue into what is the not so positive developments in terms of proposed rules regarding asylum that have come out. And I want to stress one fact. This is not law yet. This is not law yet. But we have, as practitioners, witnessed the erosion of protections afforded to asylum seekers in the United States over the last 3 years. How difficult it is. And as if that is not enough, then now there's a proposed rules that would dramatically alter asylum applications in the United States as we know it. So regarding this, I'm going to start with Moulier and ask you to speak a little bit about this proposed rule. And I want to emphasize that this rule is not law yet. It's not the law of the land right now. It is not in operation right now, but it is proposed. And so we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about how it is going to affect the practice of asylum in the United States as we know it.
Okay, Yemi, thank you for that. And with that, though, also what we have to remember is in this administration, unfortunately, we see even citizens that we felt or feel portray the best of immigrants, like DACA recipients, being targeted. So this happening, and even the president having said, I love DACA people, and that lip service really went to quickly tweeting when even the Supreme Court has told him he cannot do that, and defies that by saying, I'm going to correct it and I'm still getting rid of you, shows you the kind of attitude that we're trying to deal with. And I think all of us have to fight to make sure that there's equality in at this time. And what a timing even for them to pass this proposed rule, or register this proposed rule on the month of World Refugee Month. And what an insult and what a slap in the face to all migrants and refugees in this world. And what an insensitive way to disregard their plight and suffering. Now, having said that, yes, as Yemi has said, this has not passed, and this is just a proposed rule, but we have to be careful in not just sitting back and thinking, oh, this cannot pass. This is too harsh. Nobody's going to let this pass. We have to fight. All of us listening today, as I said earlier, we call on all of you to call your representatives, because what we tell you today is not what matters. What matters is you reading what's proposed and understanding it in detail and reaching out to your representatives, and as citizens, making sure that your representatives hear you and bring this fight to the forefront to make sure that these injustices are not done. So this proposed rule basically is headed as procedures for asylum and withholding of removal, credible and reasonable fear review. And by the way, that review is going to be significant as we go, because in the past it's been called interview. Now they're just going to review. They're not even going to really look at it as an interview, but as a review process to even see, should we even let you be able to bring to a judge or to a full due process procedure where you could be heard and where you could really discuss, be able to present the suffering that you have had in your past and why you deserve to get refuge in the United States. And what we see with this rule, I mean, it's 161 pages of a proposed rule, which was really very disturbing for me to read yesterday. And with each paragraph or each thing that I read, Media and I were blowing our phones back and forth as we had this assignment for the two of us to try and cover this today, where my jaws were dropping each and every time of as to how the most deserving of refuge are still being actually persecuted more by this country. And that's unfortunate. And that's so sad as a person who came to the United States and has been so happy to have that refuge, see that. So basically, for us to be able to cover every single detail in this 161 pages is impossible, and we're not even going to attempt to do that. But what I would like to say is this proposed rule basically says, we don't care about precedent decisions in the past. We don't care about what other courts have said in the past. We are the ones who have the right to make any kind of immigration rules and regulations in this country. And we are going to take that power and authority. We're going to wipe out any other thing that's been there before. And we are going to say, this is how we interpret it. This is what's going to happen. And this is where we go from here. So if you don't like it, give us your opinion in the next 30 days. We'll think about it. That's really what it is. And what it's trying to do is, for example, there's a procedure that's always been there, even for people who have come to this country, whether it's at the border or at any port of entry, and have surrendered and said, we fear going back to our country. And when a person does surrender at a port of entry and says they fear going back to their country because of a harm or persecution based on one of the 5 grounds, where they have automatically, they will go into an interview, credible fear interview. This one, however, is saying, even though you say that, what we're going to do is we're just going to do a review. And even after the review process, actually the burden, what they have to meet, what they have to show to be able to even go to the next step to see a judge has been raised. So they raised the bar. First of all, raising the bar and discussing what that bar is, I think, is way too much out of the scope of what we're trying to do today, because it's very legal terms and legal standards that we would be discussing. But it's basically, they've made it harder on what a person who is fleeing has to prove to be able to get to the next process of being able to present their case. They're taking away due process rights, in my opinion, as to how their immigrants are able to present their cases. So they're basically saying, even at the beginning, when we said, yes, once we determined that you have a credible fear, then you have the right to have a full hearing, a due process protected full hearing before a judge. We can even take that away. And if we don't feel, if we feel you haven't met basically they're even saying, media, if I'm getting this correctly, you don't even have the right to immigration court hearings if we say enough is enough.
Basically,
proceedings.
Yes, a judge can review the determination of the asylum officer's credible fear. But basically, if you don't pass the credible fear, that's basically the end of it, which has been the same up until now, but the standard has been raised significantly. And the immigration judge, even if you pass that hurdle, the immigration judge can still look at your application, the basic application, and say, oh, you don't meet the standard, that's it. You won't even get a hearing date.
Yes. And then also what's important on that one is, in the past, and not even, putting aside even the higher standard that they have to meet, in the past, if an immigration officer does not find that you have credible fear, if he makes that determination or she makes that determination, and if you're asked, would you like a judge to review this negative credible fear determination? And if the applicant says yes, or they go, of course, directly. But if they don't say anything, if they're quiet, because some people really don't even know if it's good for them or not good for them to go to the next step. Nobody's explaining their rights to them or the process. So if they choose to be silent on that, then it had always gone to an immigration judge to review. Now they're saying you have to voice your opinion and affirmatively state that you do want an immigration judge to review it. Otherwise, if you don't affirmatively state that you want a review, then we will enforce our expedited removal rules, which is returning you back to where you came from, period.
So basically, an applicant is expected to understand the procedures, the appellate rights and whatever in advance of even coming to the United States and so on.
Absolutely.
Right.
In addition to that, even know how to reach a higher standard, which is now reasonable fee. So they even have to reach that higher standard to even be able to advance further. And even once they advance further, my understanding is that it's proposing for the hearing to be an asylum and withholding only.
Right.
As the same as for stowaways and so forth as it used to be in the past.
Right. And it's important to understand that, at this stage, these individuals probably don't have access to attorneys or have very limited access to attorneys. They're detained. In the meantime, they're being transported from one detention facility to another detention facility, making it even more difficult for them to talk to their attorney, to meet with their attorneys. So they have no clue or idea what is going on, what are they, what is the standard they're supposed to meet, let alone to be able to meet this higher standard or higher level.
I think one of the issues regarding this stage of the process is language. There is, not most people are fluent in English, and most people who do the interviewing only speak English. So there's, I personally had an experience where, a client had an issue, wasn't understanding what the officer was asking.
Right.
And then, they take that against them in court. So, that's a huge issue too. That's not even, taken into consideration for the most part, in my opinion.
Moreover,
so let me ask you guys, actually, Mulu and Mehdi, a question. Let's start from who can apply for asylum. I think that's a major thing that has been altered, right? It's like, in other words, people crossing the border, people flying into the United States and overstaying. And so let me ask you that one fundamental question, or people that have been here in the United States for 4, 5, 6 years.
Right.
Who can apply for asylum? Because that, I believe, has been fundamentally, or there is a fundamental change being proposed in these new rules.
Yeah, it's true. So this new proposed rule significantly narrows down who would qualify and be able to succeed, in an asylum application. Not only it narrows down the definitions of, what is considered severe harm, what is considered a political opinion, and who would be able to meet those standards, but it significantly alters the definition of what is called firm resettlement, meaning, if you are able to live in another country other than your own country that you're seeking asylum from safely. So if you are basically transiting on your way into the United States, if you have a transit, if you have a stop, under this new rule, you can no longer qualify for asylum if you did not seek asylum in that country that you had a stop in. If you stayed in another country for 14 days and did not apply for asylum in that country before coming into the United States, you won't be able to apply for asylum. So basically, you have to have a direct flight.
What about if you cross the border?
So if you cross the border, a lot of people, when they cross the border, they end up crossing through many different countries on their way into.
No, actually, my question was specific. Just, you did not cross the border at a port of entry. In other words, you did not present yourself at the border for admission. So you just crossed the border.
So that, right. So that also will have a negative effect on your asylum eligibility. Because even if you meet all these definitions of asylum under this new rule and you qualify to be an asylee or be a definition of an asylee, it's still discretionary. And it's still up to the immigration judge and asylum officer to grant you that privilege. So there are numerous factors that has been introduced under this new rule that will consider negative on your, application for asylum. And one of those negative factors is if you have entered the United States illegally or unlawfully, I don't like to use that term. If you have entered the United States unlawfully, or if you have attempted to enter the United States unlawfully at any time, it can be held against you. If you enter the United States through admission through visa or any other status, and then let your status run out, or if you, like Yemi said, if you cross the border, you come without lawful status, and then try to apply for immigration status, a year later, unlawful presence a year or more would disqualify you from applying for asylum under this new rule.
Yeah, basically it came up with 9 adverse factors. So it really widened the discretion that adjudicators would have in determining to grant or not grant asylum. And it introduced 9 adverse factors that could be taken into consideration. And the first one is if you stayed in a country for more than 14 days in any other country, and in a country that permitted you to apply for refugee or asylum status and you didn't, then that will affect you if you stayed for 14 days in that country. Unless you had applied and you were denied, if you have basically passed, so anybody coming through the border, unless, well, our borders are what? Canada and Mexico. Yeah. So unless either the Mexican government had given you permission or denied your asylum application, or if they haven't done that, if you come through that, then basically that's it. You've been in, and let me just, I'm so sorry, I keep going into tangents, but one thing that really upsets me about this rule is this. The United States keeps changing its game and rules of the game and the procedure as the poor migrants and refugees are respecting that and complying with that. What did the United States say just a few months ago? Stay in Mexico, take a number, and we will process you that way. Right. So we have migrants who are staying in Mexico, have taken a number, have been there for so many months, playing by the rules of the United States and waiting to be called. And in that months of them waiting, here you are changing the rules and saying, if you have been in Mexico for 14 days and you come, now you're going to be ineligible for this. This is fundamental unfairness in any type of immigration laws or conventions that the United States is a part of. So that is one factor. And the second factor that they look at is even if you transit through more than one country prior to your arrival into the United States, that itself is an adverse factor. So they basically want you to have even a non-stop flight from your country into the United States. Here. The third factor they look at, that they consider, this I can understand, criminal convictions, okay? However, with criminal convictions, by the way, for people even that may be applying in the United States, any type of expungement, those type of things we've known in the past that they didn't work. But I think they're going further in this one where they're saying, even if there has been a reversal, a dismissal of whatever it was, if the procedural or substantive defect in the underlying criminal proceedings is what they look at. If it's not related, if it's not, and they kind of used to use that argument, if it's not related to the procedural or substantive defect in the underlying criminal proceedings, if it wasn't vacated because of that, then you'd have a problem. We've had this in the past, in my experience, right, Yemi? Do you remember?
Yes, absolutely.
Saying, we want to see why the judge in a state court,
reverse exactly
reversed it or what happened. So that's another one. The fourth is unlawful presence, like Medya said earlier, for more than 1 year. Cumulative, it says. So I guess maybe, I don't know if it's what that means. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of what does this mean kind of situation. Failure to file taxes. Okay, is a fifth factor they can use. The sixth is having applied for 2 or more prior asylum applications. And then the seventh is if you have withdrawn. We'll get to that too. I think we need a part 1 and part 2 for this 160.
Yeah,
we were actually mentioning
you need a part 1, part 2, a glass of wine, just a lot of it, maybe something stronger. You need a lot of things. Okay.
The seventh one says that if you have withdrawn with prejudice or abandoned an asylum application in the past, that could be taken as a negative factor. And DHS already may dismiss the case of an alien who fails to attend his or her asylum interview without prior authorization. So if you missed your appointment as well and they denied it, that could be an adverse factor if you refile. And then aliens who are subject to final order of removal. So if you had a final order of removal and if you try to file a motion to reopen, basically based on changed country conditions and so forth, if you haven't filed that motion to reopen within a year of that changed country condition, that would be taken as an adverse factor on you. And then the other thing with the border issue is where it's giving so much leverage to the officers in making the decision. And it seems like in the past, as we know, these credible fear interviews are very short, brief, just to establish if there's a credible fear and if you're going to have a significant, be able to have a significant possibility of showing that you're entitled to asylum in front of an immigration judge in a full 240 proceedings. But right now they're saying you don't even need to get there because we chose to just let you go have your day in court. It's just because we were nice in the past when we said during IRA that we would do this. But the officer can basically hear your whole case. And what's so scary about that is, especially for people who are coming through the border, they don't have their documents. They don't have their evidence. They don't have any of their supporting documents and full the ability to fully present their case when they're coming in. So that's going to absolutely make it impossible for almost anybody to be able to prove their case at that point, to be able to even get to a asylum and withholding only hearing.
And Muluye, can you just to kind of give this perspective, I know you've done lots of work at the border and you've seen what's going on at the other end. Can you talk about specifically when it comes to African immigrants, the kind of environment they are living in across the border on the other side? Because there is some issues. They're fleeing their country because there's war, whatever is going on. They're coming here and finding themselves facing basically lots of discrimination, lots of threat to their lives, and just if you don't mind, just like mentioning,
I really don't mind, and that's what's dear and true to my heart, and the hard work that we all need to do is to make sure that people coming through the border are treated fairly. The kind of migrants that we see, especially the African migrants, and that I'm just saying, especially the African migrants, because they're a small group of people that are easily identifiable and are being harmed in those countries. They don't speak the language. They don't look like the people around them. So they're easily identifiable for any type of harm that's being imposed on them based on the color of their skin and where they come from. And a lot of these African migrants really don't have the strong support as a lot of other countries do, and the strong nonprofit organizations that are assisting them. Even myself, when I go, I feel, even if I go with a group, I feel I don't have that power or the ability to be able to make a difference. But what's happening to those migrants when the United States is telling them, take a number, stay there? They're being persecuted because of their race, of where they are. They're physically being harmed. The LGBTQ community are absolutely being harmed and beaten in those countries. They're facing a lot of corruption in those countries. Some of them, a lot of them, not some of them. Some of them have even been held for ransom by drug cartels, or any type of cartels that are in those countries have been held for ransom and have had families to pay to get them out of being held. So they're being blackmailed. They're physically being beaten. They cannot speak the language, so they cannot find a job. They cannot sustain themselves financially. They do not have any type of housing. They're on the streets. They don't have any money to be able to feed themselves because they cannot find jobs or be given jobs in those countries. They're having the most difficult time to be able to assimilate. So I feel the Black migrants in transitioning through those countries, the Latin American countries, to get to the United States, are facing a second persecution on its own in those countries. Mm-hmm. And for us to say to them, stay there, take a number, and we will process you. And here they are enduring all those persecutions and harm. And in the middle of that, we change the rules of the game and say to them, if you do not apply there, or if you're not denied for asylum there, if you come here, we're going to automatically make you ineligible for asylum. Is the most unfair, egregious, unfair human rights violations that I see. And that's deep for me.
Yeah. Wow. And I want to give a shout out here to Mulu and just the passionate work that she's done, and Badge Eyes also as an organization, that there are all these efforts and, of lone people, really, unsupported lone people. And I would encourage you, especially as we as a nation are awakened to the plight of African Americans and treatment and racial injustice, that this racial injustice extends to our Black seekers that are across the border that are seeking to also apply for benefit. Well, I think this conversation needs to continue at another time. And unfortunately, when we come back in another 2 weeks, we will have a lot of other new things we are also going to talk about. But I want to flesh this further. And as we conclude today, as Moulier reminded us, is World Refugee Day. And let us be mindful of that. And we're also at this junction in our country where we're awakened to the injustices, as I said, against Black people. And those include the African migrants that have to trek across many, many countries, and how this proposed changes would affect them disproportionately. And what is at risk is their lives.
Right.
And Black lives matter.
Yes.
Life matters.
Yeah.
And so this is a good time, I think, for us to end on this note. So I'm going to ask each one of you to sort of say your concluding remarks. Media, thank you. You're a fabulous guest. You're a great lawyer, man. I think I may hire you.
Media's passion too, and speaking to her, and how you actually I text Media and I say, Media, have you read this? What do you think about this? So yeah, yes, your office is well taken care of.
I'd give a thumbs up for Media.
Good work.
Yeah. Good work.
Thank you, guys.
So Yema, do you have any concluding remarks?
No, I think, I wasn't thinking about it, but if you ask me, I think, I was thinking when we started this conversation a month or so ago, we thought we were dealing with coronavirus and, we're just gonna give information regarding that. And here we are 3-4, sessions later, we're still addressing, current issues and that are really important to people. And, hopefully it's making an impact on people's lives. You guys, can you hear that? Sorry about that.
Yes.
So keep up the good job. I'm like really excited to be along on this ride. As long as I'm able, I'm willing to continue to do this. And, thank you for Mulu for, getting this started, and Yemi for your wisdom. Media, welcome. And I'm sure we'll see you, a lot more in the future.
Yeah.
And, that's all.
Yeah, and Media, I would love for you to say also maybe a little, final remarks, but at the same time, with your final remarks, if you can say a little bit of what people can do to make a difference. How can they act? What is it we're asking them to do?
Thank you, Mulu. Yeah, I was just going to conclude by saying, so with all this like bad news that is coming on our way, how can we take action? What are the immediate things and what are the long-term things that we could do? The immediate things that can be done to hopefully stop this rule from going into effect is leave a comment under the rule. You have until August to leave comments. And the administration, it's supposed to consider those comments in finalizing the rule, and it could affect them in amending the rule, or, so we can only hope that everybody is going to leave comments and tell the administration about how this rule is so unjust, and that how it will affect individuals, many individuals. We will leave the link for the federal registry on our video. You can click on that link and then it will say leave comments on the top. And so you can use that to leave your comments over there. The other thing that can be done is, like Mulu said earlier, call your representative, call your senator, and demand for them to act and do something about it. And those of you who are U.S. citizens, or if you know a U.S. citizen, make sure you register to vote. Make sure you register to vote and make your voice heard.
Yemi, any final remarks?
Vote. Vote.
Mulu, do you have to ask? Do you have to ask? Really?
I'm sorry, Yema.
It is said we have the right to vote. We need to make sure our voice is heard. So, I always say we are in the business of making, amazing Americans, right? That's what we do. So, you know, media, was it this week or last week that we had like 5 oath ceremonies? So those are 5 voters.
Yes.
We keep adding to that voter roll, and everybody that is hearing us everywhere, that was my client somewhere along the way, or related to my client, or birthed by my client.
Right.
Go out, register, vote, okay?
Amen.
If you know me, if you know about me or whatever, go and vote. Make sure you register, make sure your voice is heard. Go out there, pound the pavement, you know, use the phone. Make sure there's a federal register on the comments. Tell them exactly how this proposed rule will affect you.
Yes.
You know, we've dealt with so many, you know, mental health issues, about people traumatized. You know, we understand, we've been through how many narratives, how many stories have we been through? How many times has it been that refugees, you know, asylum seekers need to lock this thing somewhere in their brain so that they can survive, and how long that takes? It's hard enough as it is. You know, these asylum laws are arcane. I mean, you know, they're like these 5 protected grounds, and we're trying to make sure it kind of fits in there. It's hard enough as it is. This makes it that much harder. Basically changing asylum as we know it, making it almost impossible for people, instead of making it easier, instead of us rising as a nation to fulfill the promise. You know, I always say this over and over again. The United States is great for one thing that it did in the way of asylum seekers. Unlike putting people like in camps, they assimilated. They said, go and assimilate it. And so the children of refugees and the refugees themselves have become incredible contributors to the fabric of this nation.
Yes.
You know, we're all that.
Yeah.
We are all living testaments of that. So I say, let's do it. Keep calling your representatives, the ones you voted them in. They work for you. Call them, tell them this is not right. Act, do. The more you do that, the more we're likely to see the change that we seek.
Yes. Wonderful, all of you. And with that, I think just to conclude, when you call your representatives and when you fight for this, it's not that you're just saying, let the United States just give this. The United States, you have to remember, is a signatory to the UN Convention.
Right.
Okay? And thanks to my wonderful cousin who is watching us today, who texted us, Elsie Haragoin. Thank you so much for this. I can't leave without telling you what the 1951 Convention requires of its signatories, and how you can use this to be able to say, you signed that agreement, so you need to be able to meet or live up to your signatures. The right not to be expelled, except under certain strictly defined conditions. The right not to be punished for illegal entry into the territory of a contracting state, the right to work, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to public relief and assistance, the right to freedom of religion, the right to access the courts, the right to freedom of movement within the territory, the right to be issued identity and travel documents. These are the basic rights included in that agreement that you have signed. And what you're trying to do with this proposed rule is defy or break the contract that you have signed. So with that, we call all of you to join us in this fight. Thank you, ladies, so much as always.
Thank
you, Mulu.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Media. Thank you, Eva.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.